Okay. Okay, so what we're going to go through in this training session is really quite straightforward. We're going to go through very quickly what remote volunteering actually entails. I know there are a couple of people on this session who already do some remote volunteering, but there are other people who might volunteer on site, whether that is in a Discover role, a Dazzle role, or possibly conservation or collections care or something like that. So we'll go through what remote volunteering actually means and what that is. And then we'll talk about what this project is, why we're doing it. I will give you a quick tour around the Zooniverse site, but I am going to largely leave that for you to have a look at. I'm just going to answer the phone very quickly in case that's someone that's struggling to log in. Hello, Callum speaking. I'm good, thank you. Are you struggling to get in? That's all right. I will send you a recording if you're not able to get in, so you'll have that at least. And then I can give you a ring another time if you don't make it. All right. All right, no problem. I'll give you a ring tomorrow then. Cheers. Thanks, Karen. Bye. Sorry about that. So anyway, so we'll go through what remote volunteering is, what we're doing on this project and why, and then I'll give you a very quick tour of the Zooniverse site that we've got set up, which is kind of a portal for how we're doing all of this work. I'm not going to give you a full tour of that, or at least I'm not going to go into every single little detail. I'm more than happy for you to have an explore, look around that and work a few things out and then get back to me if there's any questions you've got. I'm then going to hand over to Andy Williams, who is the museum's SEO consultant, SEO being the search engine optimization. Andy will introduce himself and give you a much better understanding of what SEO is than I can. So I'm going to leave that to him. And then we'll go to Andrew Davis, who is one of the museum's systems managers on the collections database. So basically manages where IWM's collection is stored and then goes out onto the museum website. But again, Andrew is going to be much better able to explain how all that works than I am. And then to finish off, once we've got all of that information, you've got an idea of what we're looking for and how this is all going to work. We'll do a couple of examples together on Zooniverse so that you get an idea of and a little bit of confidence of how everything kind of fits together. And you can ask Andy and Andrew and me some questions as well while we're here. So starting off with what remote volunteering actually entails. There are kind of three really important things to mention here. The first one is it's incredibly flexible. So you might find that you do this in 10-minute chunks. You might do it sat at home in front of a desktop. It might be something that you do on a phone on a bus journey or on a train journey. Or it could well be something that you spend 20 minutes between Emmerdale and Coronation Street doing. You might actually find that when you sit down in front of a computer and you have a plan to do 20 minutes, you end up doing 2 hours because it is the sort of thing that could get quite addictive, in all honesty. So that is kind of down to you, how you want to structure that volunteering work, because it is flexible and it is also really independent. We will ask you to log your hours on Better Impact because one of the things we want to measure with this pilot project is volunteer capacity. So we're not sort of saying it's a competition who does the most records, but what we're looking at is, from our point of view, how many images do we need to get out each month for you to be able to process, and that sort of thing. Second thing to mention is that you can do this from anywhere. So it's anywhere you have an internet connection, you are able to volunteer. So that, like I said, might be at home, might be on the bus, might be in a lunch break at work, although I'm not necessarily recommending that, especially for you, Christoph, at IWM. And the other thing is that we're tapping into a digital audience. So not only our audience and the people who are going to be using the data that you give to us online, you're also online as well. So the whole project is basically done on the internet. Second thing to kind of talk about today is why we're doing this. So we currently have around about 14 million unique users of the IWM website each year. The aim in the next 3 to 5 years is for that to reach 35 million. Now that might sound like a lot, but we'd estimate there's around about 250 million potential users out there. So actually 35 million is quite realistic. However, that needs a website that has discoverable and findable and usable records, because the main part of IWM's website, the biggest part that is used is the collections website, or the collections part of the website, with people doing research or looking things up. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this. The second reason we're doing this is to increase non-site engagement. What we mean by that is people who are not coming into branch, whether that's North, Duxford, HMS Belfast, Lambeth Road, or Church of Warrooms. But we can still engage people through the website in the cause, the consequences of war, and the cause of the museum. So what we're doing here through the website is engaging with researchers, and by researchers I mean pretty much anyone that is looking something up online. So that could be school children all the way through to military historians. And we're giving them a gateway into our collection. So we're saying, okay, you found this photograph. Would you then like to go on to look at this photograph? Or maybe look at this collection item that's related? And then from there, would you want to visit? Would you want to come to our research rooms? Would you want to buy something in the shop? You know, all of these different things that we can then go, okay, you've started off your journey on the website here. Where else can we take you from that? And then the final thing that we're looking to do with this project is filling gaps in our records. This is an enormous experiment for the museum. We have never done anything like this before. And we are going to learn a lot, whether that's as staff members, as volunteers, as a museum more generally. And that's a really, really important point. And why we're doing this as a 3-month pilot before we dive into doing this hopefully as a full project. So we've intentionally chosen or been able to recruit a really wide variety of people with different backgrounds and experience. And that's really important for us, because not only are we looking for people who have decades worth of military research experience, we're also looking for people who might just have an interest, who might say still be at university and have an interest in working in a museum collections job. So we're looking at an enormous range of people so that we get a range of feedback for how we can make this project work. And we don't know all the answers. So you may well ask a question in this training session tonight, and me, Andy, and Andrew might well say, we don't know. That's something we'll find out in the next 3 months. And that's absolutely fine as far as we're concerned. And hopefully that's a really nice thing for you as well, because it gives you some ownership and some way to shape this project. So we will be having regular meetings. I think the next one I put in my diary, sort of penciled in, will be Monday the 23rd. These are not obligatory, you must be at this meeting, but they are an opportunity for you to have a conversation with me, with Andy, with Andrew, and ask any questions, give us any feedback, suggestions, ideas. Obviously, you don't need to wait for those meetings. If you come up with something on Wednesday this week, just send me an email, give me a ring, and we can talk things through like that as well. So really, really important. And the one thing to take away from this session is be involved and talk to us. which will be great. So that's kind of the background to the project. I'm now going to very quickly share my screen with everybody and give you a quick tour of the Zooniverse site so that you can see the sort of thing that we're actually asking you to do. And this will be hopefully really quite similar to the application forms that we asked you to fill in. But what you can see here is the homepage for Zooniverse. The idea with Zooniverse and why we're using it is because we can't give volunteers direct access to our collections database to a program called Axial that I'm sure Andrew will mention later on. So what we're doing is Andrew's team are exporting photographs largely, in fact completely, out of Axial. They're being uploaded to Zooniverse, which is an external website. But the project itself is private, so it's not open to the public. You can only access this if I give you access. We're asking volunteers to fill in titles, descriptions, or in some cases titles and descriptions for our records. And then that data is collected through the Zooniverse portal. We do a quality assurance on that data. So before anything goes back into our collections database at the museum, it will be looked at in the first instance by curatorial staff or collections management team staff. My hope is that at some point we can streamline that process and potentially have volunteers doing a first round of quality assurance. Because how this works is we will be asking for a minimum number of classifications per item. So for every photograph on this Zooniverse website, we will be asking to start with for 5 volunteers to process that data before it removes itself from the site. So every single photo will have 5 possibilities, and that will allow us to say, okay, these 4 are all very similar. This one is an enormous outlier. Before we go any further, let's remove the outlier. And then those 4 possibilities that are left will be amalgamated into the one version that ends up on the museum's website. Obviously, that number of 5 is picked out of thin air at the moment. Like I said, this is an experiment. We might find that we lower it to 3. We might find that we have to up it to 7 or 8 or 9. But ideally, eventually, we'll be able to give our curatorial or collection staff a really good and precise title and description for each of our item records. So what you're looking at here is the homepage. This is really straightforward. There are a couple of things to mention on here. First one is down at the bottom here. This is just about the project itself. So a little bit more information for you, particularly this middle paragraph, which is quite important for you. And I will allow you to have a read at your own leisure. But the more important thing is these 3 boxes up here. So you can see we have adding titles to collections, adding descriptions to collection items, and adding titles and descriptions. These are kind of the 3 different workflows. So some of the records we're asking you to look at will have a description already, but no title. In that case, they'll be in this workflow. The opposite to that, so they have a title but no description, will be in here. And then adding titles and descriptions is basically where we have no data at all at the moment. So if you click on one of these, so if you click on here, it will take you through to a photograph, and the tasks will appear on the right-hand side, just up here. We will come back to that shortly. But the next thing we're going to look at is the About page. Again, this is the same text that's on the front homepage. More importantly, possibly on here is under the team section. You have my details in there should you want to contact me. You can contact me anytime, Monday to Friday, and I am based at Duxford and at London, depending on what day of the week it is. So you can always come and knock on my door as well if you need to. And then we have the classified page. So this is what I was just talking about. There's a couple of things that I'm going to talk about here, and then I'm going to hand over this largely to Andy and Andrew. The first thing is, when you first open this page for the very first time, you will have a pop-up that comes up with a tutorial. This again is something that we'd love your feedback on, any suggestions or advice with this. It's not going to be perfect. So please, like I said, do get in touch with us about it. But this basically gives you an idea of what we're looking for and how the site works and what tasks are asking you to do. So you can just flick through and eventually you'll get to the end. If you click let's go, or even just close the screen, you can start typing up in here. The second thing to point out on this page is this little I button down here. Now, if you click on that and it's labeled metadata, it will bring up a file name. If you copy the file name into here, yes, first off, we do have breaks. And then if you delete a couple of things, and then search for this page, if you delete the underscore and the 0 and some of the records that are on the start, you can see it brings up the same picture but on IWM's website. So we've got that picture here, Zooniverse, and the matching picture on IWM's site. Now you can see there's not a title in there, although it says photograph. I'm sure Andrew will explain that's not actually a content title, which is what we're going to be asking you to help us with. And there's no description at all down here either. So that's kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking for. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about on here is the talk page. Hopefully some of you will be familiar with online website forums. So things like Reddit and that sort of stuff. This is a private forum for this particular project. In a sense, these three that I've already put in here are just copied from other Zooniverse projects. If you have any suggestions of what might be useful in here, please do let me know. What I'm hoping is that over the next 3 months or so, we get to a stage where actually the project almost runs itself amongst volunteers and is really community focused and community led. So we might have a situation where Andrew's looking at one of the photos and he's not sure what one of them shows. Possibly he's looking for what one of the cap badges on one of the military uniforms is. We have an option in here for researching methodology questions or queries. So there's absolutely no problem with you just sticking something in here, say new discussion. And what I would suggest, you will remember the metadata. That is a unique ID number for each item on the collections page. I would suggest either in the comments or in the title, include that ID number somewhere so that other volunteers are able to find that image. So that they can actually help you, because otherwise this is completely useless. So yeah, other things on here, collect. This will show you the last 20 classifications you've done, and so will the recents. So you can see what you've recently been working on. So I think that's everything from me. Is there, at this stage at least anyway, does anybody have any questions, thoughts, suggestions, ideas, etc., at this point?
I have one.
Okay.
So I went to this website, yeah, Zooniverse. How because you have to have somehow, you have to sign in, or you're gonna have a link, or?
So what we will do is, in the next, either tonight or tomorrow or whenever you get a chance to do it, if you register, which is in the top right of the page, if you register and create an account for yourself, if you then email me your username, I can add you as a tester to this project, and I will at the same time send you a direct URL link to the project as well. Because this isn't a publicly available project at the moment, we have to do it in a slightly roundabout way. But hopefully that's not too big a problem. Jackie, the initial trial is 3 months, so it will run from today through to the end of March. We will do all the evaluation end of March and in April. There is a what's known as a collections management board meeting in May, up to which we will take the results, and if they're happy with it and they're happy with the evaluation we've done, we'll look at starting a wider and bigger project based on the same lines.
Callum, I have a question. I'm not too sure what data other than what you've explained us that you want to share, but I know that from working on the memorials one, there's some forced questions on us, so forced things that we have to do. As an example, when you're entering a new name for somebody, you have to tell them whether they died or not. And although that's nice to be forced, it's forced at the wrong point, because if you didn't force me there and I could load it up as a group load, then it would be so much quicker. So will we have an opportunity to influence what we're forced to do in this, so that we can make it slicker for us to upload it? That's one question.
So at the moment, we're only asking you 2 questions.
Okay.
And
So
those 2 questions are, please, can you give us a title?
Yeah.
And the second one is, please, can you give us a description?
Okay, cool.
And those 2 questions are basically necessary for each of the items.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. I'll ask the question when we get to discussing what we could do to improve the memorials one, then perhaps another time.
Yeah, that's a question for February, I think.
Yeah. Okay, no worry.
Is there anyone else, or am I good to hand over to Andy to talk about SEO? Perfect. So, Andy, are you ready? Happy to go?
Yeah, all good to go.
Perfect.
Hi then, guys. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the SEO element of this, and the idea of SEO and how we're going to try and sort of incorporate it into the work that you guys are going to be doing. The important thing is that it might sound a little bit complicated or a little bit confusing or a little bit conflicting with what you're expecting to be carrying out, but we don't want that to be the case. It's more kind of like a guideline and to sort of bear a few things in mind, as opposed to a very sort of strict way of working. We want you guys to kind of have the freedom to input the information you guys feel that should be inputted. So it's just a kind of bear in mind, we also want to sort of broaden the horizons as to the outreach of organic traffic on the back of the work that we're doing, and sort of kind of reach out to a new audience of people who we're not reaching out to at the moment. So the idea of SEO is that you work with data that comes from Google, that originates from how people search and how people look for certain things on the internet. So, for example, with IWM, people who are looking for information with regards to World War I or World War II, or photographs of people in World War I, World War II, or any type of conflict, or any sort of information that IWM are offering. And on the back of that, I'm able to research which phrases and search queries they're carrying out in order to find the information that's on the IWM site. And the same theory is with any website on the internet. And with that information, I can then take the most relevant search queries that people are carrying out and try and implement them into the website, so that those web pages then become relevant to those search queries. And when the two are married up, when you carry out a search query, Google then hopefully brings up the IWM content as the most relevant, and therefore more people click through, and then we build our organic audience. So on the back of that, we're going to try and kind of give you guys an idea as to the sort of information that you should be thinking about when you're adding these titles and these meta descriptions and so forth. So if I share my screen with what I've got at the moment. So we're going to be working on these types of pages, obviously on the Zoomiverse platform, as opposed to this one. And we're going to be looking at these titles and these descriptions here. So you're going to be probably working on the ones that don't have this information in at the moment. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking at 2 examples with the information in, and then with the examples that I've got, so that you can see the difference in the way that I would be working on. What would usually happen is that up here is your title tag for the page, and this would usually be filled in separately and uniquely compared to the title that's on the page. But the way that the platform is set up, the information that we include here is also going to be included here. So that means we're going to have to sort of go along a few SEO guidelines at the same time to make sure that that information sort of reaches that need as well. And there's also something called meta description, and that information is going to come from here. And again, in an ideal world, the meta description would be different to this information here. So from a search engine point of view, this section here is the title tag, which is this bit up here. And this is the meta description. And these are the 2 bits that would be individual from this bit and this bit. And the information you want in the title tag and the meta description should give an indication as to what is on that page, what is relevant to that page, why should people click through to that page. And it should also tell Google what that page is about, so that when Google gives all the information as to say you're searching up, say, red shoes, the most appropriate page that delivers red shoes would be top, and then so forth and so forth. So without that information, Google doesn't know that these pages are relevant to certain generic key terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at how we can bring more generic and more relevant terms into these fields, so that Google then allows these pages to be relevant to a bigger organic audience, and therefore we're going to increase the amount of people that come into the site. So at the moment, we'll start with this page, and it'll start to become a bit more clear once we start looking through exactly what I'm talking about. So if I bring up this, so I think I'm going to have to change this again, which is what I did this morning. So if we look at the first page, which is this one. So at the moment, the current title on that page is British Army on the Western Front, 1940 to 1980. That kind of gives a fair bit of information as to what that picture is relevant to, but it's a little bit vague with regards to reaching out to a bigger audience. So what I've done as an optimized change is change it to a British sniper in the Western Front trench, World War I. Now, the reason I've included and made that change is because, from my personal view of working with the IWM pages at the moment, I know a lot of people are looking for trench warfare or trench pictures or pictures to do with soldiers within the trench of World War I. So I know that including a term such as trench is going to reach out to a far bigger audience than not including it there. And I also know that by including the fact that this is a World War I picture, we're also going to be reaching out to an audience that are looking for World War I pictures, and specifically World War pictures of soldiers in trenches and so forth. Keeping the Western Front in there because we know that a lot of people are interested in sort of the Western Front and that element of the World War I. So that slight change there changes the relevance of the page quite dramatically. So we know straight away that this is going to appeal more to a World War I audience. We've included trench because we know that trench warfare and that element of that picture is going to be more important than just simply saying it's the British Army on the Western Front. Now, although it's got 1914 to 1918 and Google is clever enough to know that that will be relevant to World War I, the fact that we've actually got World War I in that title tag means it's going to be far more relevant than asking Google to work that out. And then if we look at the description, the current one on the page is this one here. Now, this is actually quite a good one because it's quite descriptive and it's got quite a lot of information in there that would make that page relevant to the sort of audience we would want that photograph to become relevant to. But what I've done is I've slightly changed it And I've added this right at the beginning, World War I photos. And this is an element. I know we're going to be working only on World War I photos for this first part of the project. So it'd be very good practice to have this at the start of every single description. Now, the reason for that is because a lot of people look for World War I photos, and it might be their starting point on their search journey. So what you'll find is you'll have two different types of audiences when you're carrying out a search. One will be people who are looking for brand new information and they don't understand the information they're looking for, or they don't know the terminology, or they're starting a project, or it could well be that they're at school or they're studying World War I and they're looking for World War I pictures or World War I battle scenes or tanks or aircraft or anything like that. But they don't know the names of the tanks, they don't know the names of the battleships or the aircraft or anything like that. So their search query will be very generic. So they're likely to include something along the lines of World War I photos and then what they're looking for. So by including that, we're making this page very relevant to the fact that we're telling Google these are photos from World War I. And from there on in, again, I've included the fact that it's a frontline trench picture, and we've kept the information that's in there that it's a sniper from the 6th Battalion. We've kept we've kept the date in there because that's quite an important element as well, and it gives a bit more information to Google. And we've kept that information in there as well because this is actually quite a good description. But by adding just a few more elements, we're just making that page a bit more relevant to a wider audience. So that's the kind of information that we're looking to include within these sections here. So it's all about giving Google and a potential audience a bit more information to work with, something that's a bit more generic. So although we want to be as descriptive as we can with these elements, and any information that you guys have got that is sort of very specific to any of the images that you see. I think we saw this morning some of the examples when we were working through at the end. The information that I was going for wasn't as specific as some of the information that the volunteers were going for, because they know more about it than I do. So we kind of saw both sides of the search queries, if you like. Someone who is at the start of a search and doesn't quite know what they're looking for, and someone who has a bit more information, and so they might be looking for something very specific. So trying to combine the two is very important. And the second example we've got will be this page. So if I open up again, so this one's a little bit different, as the image is quite nondescript really. So the fact that we know this is relevant to the First World War, and that we know it's part of the Royal Naval Air Services, because that information is already on this page. But beyond that, you might come up with some of these images where it's simply that, and there's not really much to work on. So when you've got that in front of you, we kind of again need to think more generically again to get that information on the page. So if you look at the example that I've gone for there, so at the moment we've got that one, which is very similar to the one we looked at just now. And my recommendation would be to change it to that. So it's more in line with what someone would be searching for if they were looking for a battleship during World War I, or a battleship that's related to World War I. Because there's not anything else going on in that picture, that's kind of all we can give, but that information is a little bit more targeted than it is there. And so, again, I've included World War I there, so that we've got that relevance in there, so people know that it's to do with World War I. Google knows it's to do with World War I. Did we have a question coming in there?
Yeah. So hundreds of questions come to mind immediately when you start talking about this. First of all, the first description you gave us showed WW1. The second description showed World War I. Should we include World War I or WW1? What's the preference?
Well, this is something that came up this morning. It is one of those which one should we use type scenarios. Now, Google's clever enough to know that World War I First World War, WW1 and the Great War are all the same. And if you carry out a search for something that says World War One, you're likely to see in the result pages a complete mix of different terminology for that same war. In an ideal world, we would have a fixed way of writing it, and that would be the way that we wrote it across everything. The reason we might use a different way of doing it will be just the space that we've got on the page with regards to the amount of information we've got. So when you find yourself in a limited character section or a field there, which comes into play with the title tags, because you can only have up to 70 characters displayed within the search engines, then you might abbreviate it to WW1 or WW2 simply because you're running out of space and you're trying to get as much information into that field as possible. But with regards to sort of getting an audience on board, Google's clever enough to know exactly it's all the same thing. So if there's a set way that IWM are happy to use and that's the way they want to go, then you should follow that. But I think what we found out this morning was that because these fields are quite free, you can use whichever terminology you feel most comfortable with, and that should be fine. So there's no set way in there. But if it turns out after sort of a few months of doing this that there's a very definite way that we should do it, then obviously we'll stick to that and we'll go with that way.
Oh, and the second question then really is around the description and the title here. On the first example you gave us, you said it was British sniper in the Western Front trench was the description you wanted to go to, and then you included trench in the description. Does the emphasis to those keywords get by Google focus on the title more or the description more? So in other words, if we're running out of room, would we include trench twice and get a better search, or would it be better to put it in a particular area?
So the most important element from an SEO point of view is always going to be the title.
Right.
Now, because the titles that we're putting on page are going to affect the actual title tag, which is the most important element, it's important to have as much relevant information as we can within that title. But at the same breath, we don't want to include as many key terms as possible. It's got to read naturally. It should read naturally. So you don't want to sort of continue to add trench in the title sort of 2 or 3 times or anything like that. It should just be the once. In an ideal world, it would be in the title and the description if it was a very strong keyword that we were going after. But by its very sort of design, it would naturally be with regards to the trench one, it would naturally be in the title and the description anyway, because we're trying to describe what that photo is and what's going on in that photo. The soldier's in a trench, and that's something that isn't mentioned in the current description, but I've included it in my one with regards to the title and the description. And that's kind of off the back of, because I've worked on IWM site for a couple of years now, I know that trench warfare is quite a big thing for people to search for. So like I say, what we don't want to do is we don't sort of get hung up on which terms we should use. This is kind of more of an idea of try to be a little bit more generic and descriptive at the same time. So where, for example, on that page, we've kind of gone with what regiment he's in, the fact that he's in the sort of the 6th Battalion, he's a sniper. We've kind of forgotten that although he's on the front line, he's in the trench, he's coming out of the trench. Does that mean he's on the front line? What battle is this part of? Which conflict is this part of? So there's sort of, it's marrying up what's going on in that picture and sort of almost what time in history is that happening in. So what battle would that be related to if we know? What conflict is that related to, again, if we know? So it's thinking about the whole description as a whole. And I think what we'll find is that this will be a learning curve for all of us as to what is possible, what's going to be the most effective. And I think once we get up and running with this, we'll start to see what the sort of the trend is and what's possible. I know when Andrew talks as well after me, there'll be sort of guidelines that he would also want you to sort of bear in mind as well, that kind of work with everything that we're doing. and hopefully over time we'll sort of get together a sort of a very set way. And it's a case of the once you start doing this, the more it will just become a bit more natural. It's just that first starting point of where we're going with this. And once you've done a few, you'll kind of go, okay, I think I'm sort of getting into the gist of what's going on here as well. So it's basically that's kind of from the SEO point of view what we're looking to do. We're looking to include key information that people who don't necessarily use IWM what they would be looking for. So you can kind of take it as a given that anyone who knows sort of all the main details of certain things, certain objects, what ships are called, what aircrafts are called, they should naturally land on the IWM images anyway, because that is what these images are, and they're looking for such a granular search query. So we're just trying to sort of broaden that so it's a bit more generic, so that people who are just looking for World War I pictures, looking for battleship pictures, looking for trench warfare pictures, battle pictures, certain battles that took place within World War One, pictures that are related to World War One. It could be medals, it could be uniforms, etc., etc. We're making sure that information is in there so that firstly, Google knows this is a picture that's related to World War One. It's related to the uniform, it's related to the medal, it's related to the weapons that they'll be using within that picture, etc. And then they'll become shown to people who are carrying out those search queries. So it's just bearing that in mind. What we don't want to do is obviously try and give you a template and say, this is how you should do it, because you might have more information about certain images that a template might not allow you to put in. So it's kind of bear that in mind, and away you go and sort of run with it and see how you guys get on. And as Callum has mentioned, we're going to be on hand a lot to sort of be able to answer any queries as we go, and any issues and any problems, or if you find that a certain way of writing things is really working for you guys, you can share it with everyone else, etc., etc. So yeah, it's kind of we're all going to be finding our feet at the same time. That's the SEO way of looking at things, is to make sure certain information that is relevant to certain pages is on the page so that it becomes more visible organically, really.
Andy, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
What about the metric side of the photo? Because when Isabella sent us this photo to describe, yeah, that was just sort of our imagination. Is that gonna be somebody will help us to research what is on the photo, or the information we can put it under the photo and with the title?
I think, Christoph, there's kind of two elements to this. There's, yes, a little bit of research is great, and having more information is never a bad thing. But I think what both Andy and Andrew are trying to find the balance of is we're looking for discoverability first and foremost. So we want the layperson in the street who might not have the same amount of knowledge as an IWM volunteer to be able to find those records still. So I think it's great to have that extra knowledge, but there might be times where actually you decide you're going to rein that in a little bit and cut that back a little bit to make the descriptions and the titles that we're using easier to find, in a sense, for a layperson, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I was
Andy,
just wondering.
a little bit there.
I was just wondering if somebody opened the, looking for the photo, you find out, oh, there is a sniper. How you can say that sniper? From the photo, you can't see it is a sniper.
No, and from that respect, the only reason I used it was because it was in the current description. So I was kind of going off the back of someone like a curator or someone before me knew that that's who it was. They knew from his uniform or whatever the picture was. So that was the only reason I continued to use it. If that information hadn't have been there, I wouldn't have included it, because that would have been complete guesswork and I wouldn't have had a clue that he was a sniper. So then it would have changed. He would have been a British soldier. Again, I personally wouldn't have had any idea that he was part of the 6th Battalion. I certainly wouldn't have known he was part of the York and Lancashire Regiment. So it would have just become a British soldier on the Western Front in a trench during World War One. So that's where it becomes a bit more generic, if you like. If you come across a picture and you know for a fact that that is, say, for example, a sniper, and he was part of the 6th Battalion, then that's information definitely add into the picture, because that's going to become more helpful to anyone who's looking for that information. So I think, yeah, that's kind of a good example about when you should sort of be generic. When you come up with a picture where, especially with the battleship one, where there's nothing really in that picture to describe, you could probably even argue, there's no proof it's even part of World War One, but because we know it's in the collection as part of World War One, we know that information is to be true. So all you can put in that situation is basically that it's a Royal Navy battleship and it's during World War One. But by having that generic information in there, that gives more value than it does saying it's part of the Royal Naval Air Service during 1914 to 1918. Because we know that people are more likely to be looking up World War One battleships. So you can only be as descriptive as the picture allows, to be honest with you. There's quite a few in there that are guesswork, and as we discussed this morning, never sort of put in any information that is kind of guessed unless you're 100% sure. Then yeah, just remain generic. And there are so many photographs in the collection that it's going to be impossible to give a really long description or a very strong description or title to every single one of them. But as Andrew said this morning, it's better to have some information than no information. So everything that we do on this is going to improve the collections part of the website.
Just one last question. This is one we touched on earlier this morning, so hopefully it can be quite quick, because I'm conscious that we don't want to leave Andrew with no time at all. So Eleni has kind of asked, on the back of what you were talking about earlier with different terminology and different terms, whether there's a kind of glossary or a list of SEO optimized terms that we might be able to use.
There isn't one to hand, simply because there could literally be hundreds of thousands of different ways of describing lots of different elements to do with World War One, and it's obviously such a big subject. There's to have like a list of 20 terms is probably not something we could do. We could definitely put together like a top level list of subjects or terminology that people might search for, that might sort of give you a helping hand. But to give you the ultimate list is it's just not something we can do. So I think we can put together something that will sort of like highlight something like trench warfare during World War One. It'll be very top level, but at least then you'll know almost like the subject matters that people are searching for that you might not necessarily think of including. So I think that'll probably be quite helpful.
I think the other option you mentioned this morning was if you're not sure whether something would be in that list of terms or a kind of top level thing, just try typing it into Google. And if you get the first page is all of those results, then it works. So if you just type in trench warfare to Google, you'll probably get a load of search results, is the other way of doing it, I guess.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Andrew, are you happy to take over?
I am, yes. I'm going to start with an apology in case either of my kids come running in, as it's the witching hour when they really need to be going to bed, but they are not yet in bed. So advance apologies should you get to meet either of them. Yeah, so I'm kind of talking about this from almost from the other side of the coin, as it were. So my role at IWM is as part of the collections management team. So ultimately, we're responsible for the collections database that IWM uses, currently a system called Axial Collections. And that's where we record all of the information that we have about the objects in IWM's care. And it's ultimately what drives the information that appears on IWM.org on the online collection search. Now there was a bit of a there's several huge gaps in that pipeline. So one is that if you've ever explored the IWM website, you'll see that somewhere in there we say, oh, there are 11 million photographs in IWM's collection, and then when you toddle through to the online search, you'll find that there's only 1.2 million records of any kind, not just of photographs there. So you can instantly see there's a huge gap between what we tell you we have and what you can actually find. There are several reasons why something might not be on there. We might not have the rights or the permission to share certain images or collections, but overwhelmingly it's due to the fact that we just don't have sufficient information about what it is to share with people. And that's one of the things that we're hoping that this trial project can help us move to be in a position to address. How do we get to be able to say that there's 10 million photographs that do not have any information, that the public cannot find anything about? How can we create a system whereby we can, with as little effort as possible, allow those to be searchable and discoverable at some level? One of the other big challenges that we've got is that collections management system that my team is responsible for was really designed to allow us to find the physical item. So it was intended that if you wanted to know what was in that photograph of the Royal Naval Air Service 1914 to 18, you wouldn't be using Axial Collections or its predecessor systems to find that out, to tell you that it was showing battleships or ships in formation or anchor or whatever they're doing. The expectation was you would look at the system, you'd say, oh, there's a box of photographs that sound like they might be interesting. I'm just going to walk into the store and have a look at that box of photographs, and that will tell me whether that photograph is relevant or not. It was a tool designed for staff members, for the curators here at the museum. And working on the principle that it's better to have something than nothing, that's what we've used as the basis to what we share with the public. But in the age of Google, that's obviously not good enough. It's not meeting the need to share and make the collection available. So this project is to try and how do we balance the need and desire of a curator, which would be to want to we want to be able to tell you the name of every ship in that photograph of the Royal Naval Air Service. We'd like to be able to pinpoint exactly where it is geographically. What day was that photograph taken? That's the kind of holy grail from a curator's point of view, through to how do we actually make it so that someone who's generally interested in that as a subject could possibly find that photograph and know that there's something there. So how do we balance those two things up? So the group of photographs that you're going to be starting working with are where there are definite gaps in information. So it's where that we literally have nothing in either the title field or the description. Or for the batch that I sent Callum last week, we have nothing for either. So it's completely blank. So literally anything that you can provide us will improve the situation that for users. We want to try and learn how best to support you. So exactly things like that question, those questions around terminologies. Should we be providing lists of terms or phrases or sort of approved, vetted terms to create, or is that too restrictive? Does that actually mean that you're shoehorning in things that are not actually directly relevant to a particular photograph? So we're almost as interested in this pilot part of the project in your questions and queries and sort of why are you doing it like this, how are you doing it, as what you actually tell us about the photographs. We're really interested in what you tell us about the photographs as well, and we do desperately need that information. But this is as much us learning how we can manage the process, how we can ask users, volunteers to generate this information, how we can manage the flow of that information back into the system, and ultimately how we can then make that available on both on IWM.org and internally to enhance Axial Collections. And then how can we expand the range of things? So Christoph, you had the question about how do we know that photograph was a sniper? If you told me that wasn't a sniper, I would have to bow down. I have absolutely no idea one way or the other. As Andy says, the computer tells me it's a sniper, therefore I'm kind of inclined to believe it that it's a sniper, but I don't really have a leg to stand on either way. We want to get to a position where we're trying to enhance that information and trying to improve information that's already there. So at the minute we're starting at kind of ground zero with records that obviously have nothing, but there will come a point where we're looking at how do we evaluate information that's already there. We're kind of handicapping you slightly. So one of the disadvantages of this being a virtual project is you don't have the actual item in front of you. So in lots of cases, I would imagine that were you able to flip the photograph over, it may well say on the back something like Royal Naval Air Service or sniper from the Lancashire Yorkshire Regiment or whatever it is. And that's literally what's been copied and entered in. It doesn't make it any more correct, but it gives it a little bit more provenance as a piece of information that someone at some point has written it on the back of the photograph, or potentially some other clues as to what you're looking at. But for this project, we're literally going off what can you see. So we're asking for two particular pieces of information: its title and its description. Maybe that grows as the project develops, but certainly for now, with the emphasis on SEO, those are the two important things we're looking at. Title is problematic in the museum world because it usually means a given title. It means something like this painting is the Mona Lisa. Everyone knows it's the Mona Lisa. It's also I've bitten off more than I can chew with this analogy. The Gioconda or whatever she's called, the smiling lady. That like there's a set name that it's given. For a lot of these photographs, all of these photographs, there isn't the equivalent. Potentially why that title field is blank or is incredibly generic to the point of being not particularly helpful. So what we're looking for is for you to describe the kind of key elements of what you can see. For the description task, it's almost an extension of that. There's a little bit more space. We've got a little bit more room to develop those themes. But we are specifically looking at the content of the photograph. If you spent any time on IWM.org, you may have noticed that that description field does a range of things. And for a lot of items, it actually describes the physical condition of the object. So potentially its size or its condition. So what we're not interested in you saying is the top right-hand corner of the photograph is torn off. That's not what this the purpose of this is about. This is what is the content of the image. What is it? What can you see when you look at it? I'm doing all I can not to do catchphrase at this point, but effectively that's what we're after. And yeah, we could probably go down the road, and it may be that we do take this path of providing a lot more curatorial style guidance of how we might fill that field out. But one of the things that we're interested in this project is that we're actually coming at it from a slightly different angle. So we're looking at it from an SEO viewpoint, which has perhaps slightly different principles at play. But we're also trying to use a different source of information. So we're consciously not trying to use curators to provide this information. We're using a much broader, hopefully more representative of our user base to generate that information. So we are really interested in seeing the types of thing that you describe these images as, potentially that might not be quite the same as a curator would describe it, and that might mean that we have to go away again and think, okay, how should we approach this? How do we structure it? So to start off with, we'd quite like to give you as little guidance as possible. He says a session that's been billed as a training session, because we want to see how you approach it and how you come up with it. Almost certainly, as we develop, we'll start to put in place guidelines or sort of responses to the questions that develop. But I think it's as much of a case to find out how this project should work. We don't want to steer it too much ourselves at this point and potentially shut down ideas or suggestions without having the chance to consider them. So yeah, we're really quite excited. As you say, we've potentially got millions of things we can throw at projects like this, and we could keep going for a very long time if we can find a format that works that generates the type of information that we need, that gives you guys as volunteers, it's enjoyable. Hopefully, it's rewarding. It doesn't feel like you're slogging through 11 million photographs one after the other, but there's actually that it's as rewarding as it can possibly be. And yeah, just to learn how we structure it. And it may well be that there are different types. We may learn that the types of photographs that we've chosen are not ideal for this purpose, and we maybe should have gone it in a slightly different way. Perfectly valid. We've lots to choose from. We've just started somewhere. But yeah, we're really kind of keen to see what comes back, I think, is the summary.
To kind of pick up on that last point Andrew made there, I had a brief conversation with my line manager at about lunchtime today after we'd done the first training session. And in that conversation, he actually said, at this point, we might not end up using any of the data that we collect in this 3 months. And if we don't, that's absolutely fine, because what we're trying to do is learn and take that data and say, okay, how can we make this better? How can we improve this? We've done this as an experiment. What worked well, what didn't work well? So it might be that, as I say, we don't actually use anything that you send to us in the next 3 months, but that's not necessarily the value of why we're doing this. So yeah, as I think everyone has said so far, please give us as much feedback, suggestions and ideas as you can. Has anyone got any questions for Andrew on the back of that?
I was going through my head while you were talking, Andy, about this generic statement that we're looking to put into these to aid the SEOs to find the data easily. And the experiment you're really going through is the anti-SEO, isn't it? It's almost looking at it from the other perspective, where the people that have got the data are actually inputting the information, but in a way that I don't really quite how to say it. It's so confusing in my head here, because I'm saying SEOs are great in that they're generic, but you want them to specifically find you, and you don't want to limit what we're putting in there to affect how the SEOs might work. So it's an interesting concept. You know? So it's what
I'm picking up is that our target audience isn't the military historian who knows full well that that's HMS somebody or other cruising around the North Sea in 1916. We should be thinking of the kind of 14-year-old schoolboy who is doing something on ships in World War I. That's our target audience that we're writing for on this experiment. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, yeah, but do you not want to also not limit the people that are doing the detailed research from also finding it, because they're putting in too generic a statement, you know?
I think that's effectively what you're both describing is I used the word tension this morning. I still haven't come up with a better word to describe it. We're kind of pulling in two different ways, and what we want to try and do is find how do we put. The ideal is that we have both the specifics that allows the military historian to find exactly the thing he's after, but also allows the 14-year-old schoolboy to say, oh, I don't need to know that that's HMS Medusa, therefore it's a Type 2 frigate. They don't need to know that. They can just say, I want on a warship. Brilliant. There we go.
So what you're trying to find then is somebody that types in, just give me what I want, and that it comes up, yeah.
Which is we're not asking for much. We're not asking for much, are we? As part of this project, no.
I think.
I get it. It's good.
I think the best way that I've heard this described, and this was actually by one of the volunteers I was talking to in the War Memorials office just before Christmas about this. The example they came up with was a Second World War Matilda 9 tank. Now, if you put in the description, Second World War Matilda 9 tank, you're still hitting the SEO buzzwords, for want of a better phrase, of Second World War and tank. But you've also got Matilda 9 in there as well for that military historian, that military researcher. So it is definitely possible. And I think this project, a lot of it is going to come down to, and one of the really interesting things I think for us, definitely for Andy and Andrew, is going to be where that balance kind of falls. And it is definitely possible to do. I think it'll just be interesting working out, as I say, whether it's slightly more this way, slightly more that way. And in all honesty, at this moment in time, I don't think any of us can give you an answer. It's going to be something we find out by March, hopefully.
Well, and underpinning all that, at the minute, there's nothing. So whether we end up at one end of the scale or the other end of the scale for each record, anything is improving it. Anything makes it more likely that the professional researcher or schoolboy will be able to find it. So yeah, there's all kinds of things that we as an organisation need and are hoping to learn from this as a project, but we probably almost have as many questions as you guys do about it. I think about in how it's going to work, and we're only really going to learn that through going through it. So yeah, your feedback is almost as important as the text, the metadata that you submit.
Brilliant. On that note, shall we have a look at some actual examples, so that you can kind of have a look at how the website works, and then whilst we've got Andy and Andrew here, we can fill a couple in and sort of say, yep, this works in this way. Actually, we might have changed this phrase into this phrasing and that kind of thing. So as we jump into this, really important thing, there is absolutely no judgment in this Teams meeting. So please do not be afraid to put your hand up and have a go at this. The worst we'll do is rewrite everything that you told us. but yeah, it genuinely is, like we've all said, a bit of an experiment. So there isn't really a right and a wrong answer here. So we're as much interested in what you come up with, to be honest with you. So if we go, let's have a go at titles and description. So you get to do a little bit of both. So here is a first photograph and I'm going to give everyone a little bit of time to actually examine this image. And then if someone would like to volunteer a description, that would be excellent. Christoph, do you want to have a go?
Yeah, I would say I think is well, we can't sort of produce them, but he's dressed in a warm coat and is a German pilot, I would say, from First World War.
Okay, anyone else want to have a go before I bring Andrew and Andy in?
I don't think we know he's a pilot. He's definitely German. I would say posing in a leather flying coat.
Yeah. Andrew, do you want to jump in?
I think, yeah, this is a good example of one of those photos where there's kind of nothing really to go on. I mean, yeah, we can see he's either a German pilot or someone from the army, or so I don't think there's much more you can do there, other than I think in this circumstance you would try to just emphasize he is a German serviceman. It's in World War One. If we were able to clarify if he was a pilot or not, we would obviously include that. But in this circumstance, there's not really anything else you could go for, really. But that would then, from an SEO point of view, come under the umbrella of someone who's looking for maybe German uniforms in World War One, or a German soldier in World War One, or a German pilot in World War One. So it kind of ticks all the right boxes. There's nothing really else to go on. The fact that he sort of stood in potentially a garden or some ground somewhere is irrelevant, so that's not something you would include. So yeah, from an SEO point of view, I wouldn't go any further than that. That's kind of as much information as you could give that would make that picture as relevant as it would be in the search engine?
I have a question, because there in right hand side low corner there is some kind of sign.
There is.
Yep.
Is that part of the photo, or?
It could be. So what I would do in that situation is, because Zooniverse doesn't allow you to zoom, or doesn't give you very much zoom, is I'd have a look at the ID number and look that up on IWM's website, where you'll be able to zoom in a lot further on that image, and that may or may not tell you something. So that would be a good potential look forward.
So how do we know he's German?
I think we're going off the uniform, aren't we?
Certainly the cap, and I think what you can see of his jacket around his throat.
Yeah, I was just thinking he could be Polish or something like that.
Well, definitely not Polish.
Right.
I'm from Poland.
But I think I was going to say, this gets back to a point that came up this morning as well, as how can we use potentially the Zooniverse platform to kind of have exactly that discussion, because you're not all going to be online at the same time looking at the same image. And one of the things that I think is really valuable is kind of pooling that knowledge of kind of working through those things together, saying, oh, I think that lapel is German, I don't think that's British. What does everyone else think? That is there a way that we can kind of group source that knowledge, or kind of show our thinking, so that when we're looking back at the answers coming back, if, as Callum was saying, if a curator or a member of the collection management team is kind of reviewing something, we can at least see, well, hang on, coming back to the sniper example, like why have you put sniper? There's nothing there that says sniper. Like what is it that's making you think sniper? In that instance, it's what is it that's making you think German? What's making you think pilot or Air Force, so that we can kind of follow that through. And what we were talking about this morning, which I think Callum might be just about to demonstrate again, is this site.
Demonstrate.
I can't demonstrate because you're in control.
So I think this comes back again to the talk function that I mentioned earlier. So it might be that, Andrew's looking at that image and says, I think that might be a German pilot. And like we said before, if you take the metadata and you take that ID number and include it somewhere in the discussion, whether it's in the title or in the description, other volunteers will be able to look that up on our website and say, yes, I agree with you, that's definitely German. Here's a link to an academic research article that shows the same thing, for example. Or somebody might say, no, actually, it's not German, that's Czech. Here's an article about what Czech pilots were. So we can do it through there. The other thing to kind of remember when it comes to this is that you're not the only person who's classifying this photograph. So there will be, at least to start with, 5 different people, 5 different volunteers will all process this photograph. So it might be that 3 people say this is a German pilot, and it might be 2 people say this is somebody wearing a flying coat, or a service person wearing a flying coat. We can then use that data and look at that data, whether it's collections management team or whether it's a curatorial decision. And don't forget, we have these images as well. So if we have, let's say, somebody in collections management is looking at those 5 descriptions, they can say, okay, there's a couple of people here think this person is German. I'm going to have a look at this photo and I can have a look at that as well. So if we need to, the process that this is going through automatically anyway will flag these things up with our curatorial staff, who we would hope will have the answer to a lot of those questions as well. So there's kind of 2 fallbacks on that. Hopefully that all makes sense.
So a couple of questions here. You've just shown us a couple of images. Do these randomly pop up in our box that we want you to look at this one next, or do you select them from a list?
So when you click on either the classify button or on the home page, you've got those 3 workflows. As soon as you click on one, you'll be taken straight away to this screen. We ask you to do the first task, in this case, give us a description. For the sake of argument, let's say we go with German serviceman wearing a flying jacket. If we click next, it asks us to give a title. As soon as I give a title and click done, we'll move on to the next image automatically. So it'll just be straight onto the next image. So it's essentially just
So there's no
data, move on.
There's no chance that we're going to run into the same situation we have with the memorials one, where 2 people are editing the same file and one can't load the file up at the time. No. Okay, cool.
Even though we will get multiple people looking at the same photographs.
Yeah.
It'll be individual to your account, if that makes sense. Eleni had a couple of good questions that she's put in the chat. So looking at this one as an example, would we include things like facial expressions? So would we include something like German or potentially German pilot who is smiling at the camera? Andrew, that might be a question for you. Oh, actually, Andy's already answered that in the chat as well.
I agree with Andy, would be my answer.
Okay. So basically, no, because in this case, especially, it doesn't hold any value, either from a collections point of view or from an SEO point of view. You are not able to go back once you've submitted descriptions or titles. So if I put a title in here and clicked done, I wouldn't be able to go back and edit what I've already entered. So that is just something to be aware of. So what you might end up doing is if this image pops up, you might want, and you're not sure, you might put a question in the talk section. I'd then recommend either going back to the home page and starting again, so that you get a different image brought up, or you might potentially, I don't actually know how Zooniverse does this, you may potentially need to log out and log back in again, if you're not certain about adding an image in. So that might be something to find out. I will have a look at that actually tomorrow.
So that's interesting then. So if I have this image come up here and I have a question and I put it into the talk section, I log in, log out again, and a different image comes back up for me to comment on. Will I ever get back to the original one so that I can put in what I've decided to put in once I get the talk feedback?
So at the moment we have 555 images loaded up on the site, and they will scroll through, as far as I'm aware, randomly. So potentially not, no. Which is an interesting point for us to have a look at.
It almost doesn't seem worth asking the question.
I will have a look at that tomorrow morning, because that is a thing we need to work out, actually. Oh, what you can do, I think,
may be if you open in a new tab, and so you can access the questions but not losing the photo. I don't know.
Yeah, then you'd have to leave the photo on until you had an answer. What I'm wondering is whether there's a function to do it either through the favorites or through the collect function, which are both next to the little eye down on the bottom right of the image. So I will have a play around with that in the morning and get back to you, because that is something that would be quite useful. Okay, so has anybody, preferably not the 2 people that gave us a description, but I'm not going to stop them answering this question. Does anybody want to have a go at giving us a title for this image?
German servicemen from World War One, or WW1, wearing a leather jacket.
Yeah. Anyone else got any suggestions as well?
I think that's spot on. I think
Yeah.
from an SEO point of view, that's exactly what the kind of thing I'd go for. So yeah.
Andy, just out of
I'm
interest.
going to quit while I'm ahead there, Andy. That's I'm very good now.
Andy, just as a quick question on this, I know you mentioned this morning about character limits. Am I right in remembering that character limits ideally for titles will be around about 60?
Yeah, so because this feeds into the title tag, the title tag has got a character limit onto how much Google will display in the search results. So that is 70 characters, but because we've got the pipe Imperial War Museums at the end of every single title, that limits the amount of information we could potentially have within the title. So in an ideal world, we would be looking for a title that is between 45 and 60 characters. And that should display within the search engines. That said, if the title is naturally longer than that, so be it, because that information will then appear on the actual page itself. So any information that kind of comes towards the end of the title tag and is cut off by Google, it will still be picked up on the on-page information. So it's not the be all and end all that we stick to any sort of character limits. If we go along the same guidelines for the description, because that information is then fed into the meta description tag, which is what is displayed in search engines, that limit is 155 characters. So again, in an ideal world, the description will be 155 characters, but again, we don't want to limit what you guys put in there, because that information will then appear on the actual page itself. So it's still something that Google will pick up. So that's just something to bear in mind. It's just the longer the title, the more information will be cut off by Google when people find it in the search results. And if you had important information that was cut off by Google, it would never be seen by somebody. Therefore, it could affect them clicking through onto that page. But I think because of the way this platform is set up and because we can't change the two independently, where we'll just go with what we can do, and we'll it's not going experiment just like every other element of this, and we'll see how it's looking as and when we go, and if we need to kind of put in a character limit or start to be a little bit more stricter with it, so be it. But it's not something we need to bring in at the moment. I think it's just something, again, we just need to bear in mind.
Sorry, two quick questions off the back of that. Presumably in Zune Inverse or whatever it's called, there is no character count that I can see, nor is there a anything highlighting spelling or typing errors. So presumably we might be best to work first in Word and then simply cut and paste in.
Yeah, that's something I do on a regular basis, is to do that, just so that things like spelling mistakes and that don't sort of accidentally get in. So yeah, that's always a good way of doing it.
Yes, I think you're right. I think that is one way of doing it, and if you're happy doing that, that's brilliant. Obviously, if you're trying to volunteer on a mobile device, say on a phone or a train, you might not have access to Word. The answer in that case is that actually, again, you're not the only person that's going to be sending this in to us, and there's going to be a QA process at the end of it as well. So even if you do make typos, I would hope that at some point in the process we will pick those up anyway. So we should be okay with that. Perfect. I'm going to click on done, and we'll have a look at one, possibly two more, depending on how people are feeling, but I'm aware it is now 1:07. So when you click done, you get the option to go to talk. So you could go to the forums at this point and say, wasn't sure about this one, has anyone got any ideas? Or you can click next, and that will take you directly to the next image, and you'll start again with give a description. So it just rolls through, and that's how you kind of roll through the process. So yeah, if anyone would like to have a description for this one. Neil, Eleni, Jackie, if you want to have a go, shout out. Go on, Neil.
Yeah, I'll have a go. Anzac soldiers crossing a pontoon bridge, First World War. But then again, is it First World War or is it Second World War? I was just looking at the quality of the photograph and going with the First World War then.
Yeah, so everything that you will be looking at on here will be First World War, at least during the pilot. So you can be safe to go with that.
Mm.
And
would if you were to put that in, would you be challenged? Let's say why would you would you be contacted by the curatorial team and said why would you say that's Anzac soldiers, or are we going into that sort of detail yet, or is that something that we'll answer over the next 3 months?
Drew, I'm guessing you've got an opinion on this one.
I've got lots of opinions. Yeah, I think ultimately we'll kind of have to see how we'll have to learn through the process, which is why I was kind of talking earlier on about is if we can find a way of saying what is making you think that this is Anzac soldiers, to give whoever is reviewing it a chance to look at it, because as Callum said, there's for the pilot project we're going to get 5 different responses for this. So one way of doing that could be 4 might just say troops crossing pontoon bridge, and then a 5th one says Anzac troops. You could look at it and say, well, there's only one person mentioned Anzac, I'm going to leave Anzac out of it and go with the most generic description. But actually, that you may well be right. And particularly if it's an area that you have a specialism in, or a piece of knowledge that you really know. Like if Chris was to tell us that it was Polish soldiers crossing the bridge, that would carry quite a bit of weight with me. He's bringing knowledge that probably no other members of staff are going to be able to bring to bear on it. So it's one of the things that we need to work out through this process. Is it how do we qualify that? The pontoon bridge bit, tick, no one's going to query that. That's completely correct. Happy with that. Great. It's how do we get that other piece of information? How do we get towards Callum's example of being able to say what type of plane it is, whilst also saying that it's a First World War plane kind of thing? And it's not going to be an instant. I'm not expecting that, and if any of you are able to, we'll probably be coming after you for a job, able to look at these photographs and instantly say, yep, got it, know exactly what that is and where it is, and I can pinpoint it exactly. It's probably going to be more of this kind of collaborative process, and if we can work our way through that, I think that will make this project hopefully more enjoyable for you guys, but also what we get out of it an awful lot better and more solid. The other thing I also wanted to say through all of this is that although we want to be as careful as possible, because we're putting this out as IWM, it's got the IWM stamp on it ultimately when it goes on our website, and we are meant to be an authority on conflict, and so we strive wherever possible to be correct. If we were to put out that this was Anzac troops, or we put out that earlier image was a German pilot, that's going to help someone find it, and it will help someone find it who looks at it and goes, no, that's not a German pilot, that's a German, I don't know, another rank, or it's definitely not a pilot, it's a navigating officer. And it will help us to sort of narrow that down even further in a way that having nothing there wouldn't allow people to see it. So it's all kind of steps along a path. Ideally, we'll get things right first time, but it's all about kind of gradual improvement. And this isn't going to be the case that whatever we do, it's finished and we'll never have to look at these things again. It's all just about how we pick it forward. So yeah, really long-winded way of saying that's something we've still got to work out. You're not going to get a phone call from from an outrage curator saying why are you calling these Anzac? But we do need to find a way of kind of giving. I've got a feeling that this might be this looks like it's this thing, but I'm not confident enough to say it as an answer. But here's my thoughts on it, kind of thing.
I would have made this a little bit more of a generic statement and said these are troops guiding goods and across a temporary pontoon bridge on horseback. So you've got the horseback bit, you've got the troops, you've got the equipment, you've got the pontoon bridge as your description in.
I would have said they're camels, judging by the back legs of the ones closest.
I was about to ask a question about the animal as well. Yeah.
I was on the.
It's obvious that they're obviously Polish soldiers if they're using camels.
Yeah, I agree. I thought they were German cows actually. But yeah.
Yeah. So again, I think we kind of covered a lot of this already in terms of descriptions here, but we'd probably say something along the lines of, and Andy and Andrew, feel free to correct what I'm about to write in here, but we'd probably say something along the lines of First World War troops crossing pontoon bridge with camels and goods or supplies, or a word along those lines. Happy with that? And obviously we could include, if we were certain that these were Anzac troops, or wherever they're from, whatever nationality they are. Again, if we could include where the picture was taken, that would be brilliant, but I think we're going to struggle with that because there's not a great deal of help in that photograph.
Yeah, I think that's as good as you can get. There's no other information on that picture that you could add other than it's from the First World War. So yeah, it's as descriptive as it can be. And again, as long as we sort of add in the description somewhere that it's a First World War photo, maybe, then you kind of covered as much as you can, really. But
yep. Andrew, you happy with that?
Yeah.
Before I move on? Yep.
Yep.
Okay, and then a title for this. So again, we might end up with something very similar to the description here, although maybe try and make it a little bit shorter. So has anyone got any ideas on this one? No, everyone's gone silent. It's gone past 7. We've all given up.
No, I would have said it's a 50-letter description of cut down version of the description.
Yep. Go on then. What have you got?
Troops guiding equipment across a pontoon bridge.
I was going to say, what do we think is the most important element of that photo? Is it the troops? Is it the bridge? Is it the camels? Is it the equipment?
Well, I guess it's the World War I bit to start off with.
I presume that's sort of required first 3 words in every description or every title, isn't it?
Yes, I agree.
I think it's getting that way, yeah.
What does Mr. Curator advise?
Oh, he's far from a curator. He's a database manager. You're giving me ideas above my station. But I think that approach of what is this photograph actually about is a really good way of looking at it. So my take looking at it is that the troops are not actually central to what that's showing. It's the bridge and the crossing of it, whereas actually largely the troops that you can see are posing.
You wouldn't say the camels in that they're most unusual in the context of World War I.
I'd be if we were happy that they were camels, and as I say, I am far from a zoology expert. That if we could pin that down, I think that to me that's quite an interesting
back left foot. Have a look at the back left foot.
Is it cloven or not?
So
yes.
In the, I think Eleni has put a really good title in the chat. Yeah. We might change animal possibly to either donkey or camel. But in the chat, Eleni's written World War I troops crossing bridge with specify animal here, cargo. So something along the lines of would something like that work? So would everyone be happy with us using something like that?
Yeah, again, I think that's pretty much spot on to what you could give. I mean, just with regards to sort of we mentioned there that First World War or World War One will probably feature in all title tags. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the start of each one, so it could be the description of the image during First World War or during the First World War or during WW1. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not strict that it has to be at the beginning every single time, but yeah, obviously if it's included, then that's brilliant. So again, don't be sort of tied down by it has to start with or it has to finish with. It's type it out. If it reads nice and fluently, then brilliant. And if it sounds a little bit jumbled or it sounds the wrong way around, swap it about and see how it fits. There's no correct way of when you include it or anything like that.
Okay, so I'm going to click done and next, and then I think probably going to call it there if everyone is happy to. We are now at 7:10. Thank you everyone for being so engaged this evening and asking lots of really interesting questions. I think the last thing that I've got to say is just a reminder that the first thing I need everybody to do is to go to zooniverse.org, register for an account and send me your username. And once you've done that, I can send you all the details, URL, everything else that are there. In terms of how many photographs are actually uploaded to Zooniverse and for this project, this is kind of something we're working on. Sorry, this is to answer Eleanor's question that she's written in the chat. This is kind of something that we're actually working on as part of a finding out exercise in this pilot. So Andrew's team for the next 3 months have the capacity to send me around about 500 photographs a month. Now, if we're asking you to do each photograph to be done 5 times, that's 2,500 classifications a month, which sounds like a lot, but actually, once you get into the rhythm of doing this, it may well only take you a couple of minutes per photograph. So actually, it's not as big a number as it sounds. And I've already had volunteers that were in the training session this morning sending me emails saying, why have you introduced me to this? It's the most addictive thing that I've ever started doing. So yeah, you will hopefully actually whiz through those quite quickly. But like I say, that's part of this experiment. And if amongst you, as the 30 or so volunteers we've got doing this pilot, if you want to get through 300 photos, we'll know that for future, and we can adjust all of the numbers on the back end on our side to account for that. So yeah, sorry, what I was saying was, if everyone could go to zooniverse.org, that's zoo, as in where animals go, possibly camels, possibly donkeys, who knows. And then niverse.org, so zooniverse.org, create an account, send me the username, and preferably by email. I will then email you back with all the details and the URL to get started. That may well be in the morning because I am going home now. And you'll be able to get started from tomorrow. Brilliant. Thank you again, everyone. You've all got my contact details, so if you want to get in touch, you can do. And I will, at some point this week, send a meeting invite round for everybody for the 23rd, so that you're all available and know when those sorts of things are happening. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Good luck with it. Cheers.
Thanks a lot, guys. Cheers.
All right.